Welcome. This is Crash Canon. I'm Chris, and I've got a guest here today. Who are you? You want to tell everybody who you are?
Yes, my name is Benjamin WOLAVER. I'm a musician and an actor and a writer, and I am probably best known because I play a character called Benjamin Cello on the Wonderful World of Benjamin Cello, which is a faith-based show for children.
Yeah, and it's one I've recently discovered through our subscription to Formed. We've had it about a month or two now, and the kids immediately were like, "This show is pretty cool." And so my oldest child is 8 years old, so like it applies to all of my kids on down. I've got 5 of them.
Yeah.
And so like even the 8-year-old's like, "Wow, these guys are great musically." He likes the numbers aspect of it, like the Golden Rule episode you guys did recently.
Yeah.
So they've been enjoying it.
Yeah. Well, actually that age range is one of the things that we aim for because, well, I don't know when this started, but I think with children's content, things started to get simpler and simpler for younger ages. And I don't know, and maybe more and more attitudinal for older ages. There's kind of like there's this bifurcation that happened. But if you go back to Mr. Rogers or Mary Poppins or the kind of classic Disney era, or even the Muppets, there was these incredible, creative, really family viewing. It's for children ostensibly, but it's also for parents in a way. I remember I was reading my daughter some Winnie the Pooh stories. And I was just laughing because A.A. Milne encodes all of this adult humor and not adult in a bad way, just in a
right.
But it's just only humor you will know if you're over 15 years old. And so I think that was the way it used to be, and that's something we aspire to, is to return to that classic approach.
And I do think one of the things people forget is like children's television used to be much slower. It used to be that you didn't have this wild, like for example, the Paw Patrol, right?
Yeah.
There's not a single moment in that show where a kid is not like the casino. It's like the casino. Every sense of the child is being entertained at all times. And it's like, but that doesn't need to be that way. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
well,
so
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, absolutely. I know they've done studies, that we've been aware of where they say when things cut in a video edit like 3 seconds or faster, that it kind of short circuits something in the brain. So like children, if they're watching something and it's cutting faster than 3 seconds, it's not great for the cognitive development of a child. So for us, we did want to make it a little bit slower, and kind of meditative and real. So we have real puppets. We worked with a lady in Texas who made these incredible, large, life-size puppets that we use in our barnyard world. We have a world called the Big Old Barn, where my brother-in-law, James DeSilva, who's an amazing guitarist, jazz guitarist, I mean, probably one of the best in the world, to be honest. Like if
you guys are all very talented with the
he's
all those instruments are all of you guys are extremely talented.
Yeah. We're musicians before we ever did the show. And so James plays Cowboy Roy.
Okay.
And he it's funny. I should say my mother, Robin WOLAVER, she's a longtime writer in children's musicals and in Christian music with my father, Bill. And so when she came up with the idea for the show, The Wonderful World of Benjamin Cello, she really did base it on a lot of the things that were just part of our natural rhythm. So one of those things was my brother-in-law, James, had this hilarious cowboy impersonation of the scientist cowboy, the cowboy who can kind of talk about things at length in a cowboy way. And he would just have us in stitches. So she used that as a basis for the Cowboy Roy character. And I could go on and on about that, but it really is, if you knew all of the different people behind the scenes and how they plugged into the show, you would see that it really is a God show. It's a show that I think the Spirit of God wanted to exist. And so he just brought the right people together. A lot of them are my family, right? Which I'm sure we'll talk about, but even non-family members that have been a part of it.
So I guess since you brought up family already, has the bulk of like the music and your entertainment career has mostly been a family thing, hasn't it? Like a family organization?
Yeah, so I'm one of 7 siblings, and we all studied stringed instruments from a young age. So I started cello at the age of 4, and we all started studies at Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee, where we live now and have lived for most of my life. Um, we When I was about 11, we moved north to study at the Juilliard School for about 3 years, and then kind of got tired of the classical music path, and then decided to start a group called the Annie Moses Band, which was a classical crossover group and was basically a fusion of the string quartet that was made up of my sister Annie, who's the Annie of the Annie Moses Band. She's our lead singer
Right.
and violinist. My brother Alex, who's a very talented violist. And then my sister Gretchen and my sister Camille, who plays harp. Gretchen plays violin and mandolin and guitar. And then my youngest brother Jeremiah also plays guitar and sings. So when we started, it was this fusion, of string quartet and Annie's vocals, and then our parents' songwriting, because they were award-winning Christian songwriters. And at first we did it just to get out and perform, but pretty soon it grew beyond that. So music has always been a really big part of my life and my family's life, for sure.
What's the age range amongst your siblings? Like,
Oh gosh,
how is it a decade? Are we talking like 8 years, 20 years? What's the?
Yeah, I think the gap between Annie is in her early 40s now. I'm going to turn 37 here in July, which is a curveball.
Right.
Kind of processing that still. But my youngest brother Jeremiah is in his mid to late 20s. So I guess like a 15-year period, I would say, from Annie to Jeremiah.
I was gonna say, it seems like the age are all over the place with you guys. So I wasn't sure, So.
Yeah, no, definitely. It kind of varies. So
yeah, because like between me and my oldest sister is 14 years. So like,
oh wow,
yeah.
So is that
it's a long story.
Y'all are a big Catholic family?
No, that's why I was
really?
saying it's kind of a long story.
Oh, okay.
We don't need to get into that on here, but there is a huge age gap between me and my oldest sibling.
Well, we were a big Protestant family for a very long time. So it's, if I time traveled and told my younger self that I would be Catholic and be talking to a Catholic on a Catholic podcast, I'd be like, whoa, wait a minute,
Yeah.
Curveball again. But yeah, so I guess God works in mysterious ways for sure.
If you would have told my 18-year-old self I'd be married with 5 kids by the age of 33, I would have told you you're full of it. You know what I mean? Like that's where I was at mentally at 18. But we get where we get because the Lord wills it, right?
Right. That's right. Exactly.
So how did, I guess if you want to do a long version short, I don't care how you want to handle this, but how did you and your family all come over to the Catholic Church?
Well, the analogy I use is Christopher Nolan's movie Tenet. I don't know if you've ever watched that movie, but
I don't think I have, honestly.
Really? You haven't seen it?
I don't think I've seen that one.
It's a good movie.
I believe you.
It's kind of dark, but it's very compelling. It's a time travel movie, basically. Yeah. They don't tell you that. They never use the word time travel, but it is time travel. Right. And so there's kind of there's an idea in that movie that talk about a temporal pincer movement where one team is moving backward in time and another team is moving forward in time. And I use that analogy because that's kind of how it felt with us, because as something was happening in my life that was drawing me to Catholicism that I might have not been talking about with anybody, something similar was happening in the life of my mother. Something similar was happening in the life of my brother, who had just gotten married. So it was one of these things where the Holy Spirit kind of did a pincer movement on all of us. And we all felt this tug, and we would have these conversations like, really, you too, right? You're thinking about this, where is this coming from? So I feel like when I tell this story, it's kind of like about 6 different stories, really, but it's also my family's story, because we all did enter the church on the same Easter vigil in 2013. So
All at the
it
same
was a big,
church?
I'll say again.
All at the same church?
Yeah, all at the
That's pretty
cathedral
cool.
here in Nashville. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And to tell you even how far it went, we had a good friend, Joshua Carswell, who's still works with us on the show and in other capacities. He became Catholic at the same time we did. And he
That's
was living
wild.
with us at the time, and we were like, Josh, don't get scared, but we're thinking about becoming Catholic. And he's like, really? Me too. So it was something in the air that was going on. But I don't know. I think in some ways, my path to the faith was what I realize now is kind of a traditional path. It was through the church fathers. It was through the study of history. And I always like to highlight this because I think, I've watched enough Protestant videos and people who are maybe skeptical of some of these claims to know that, if you're a Catholic and you hear the phrase the church fathers, you're going to go, yeah,
Yeah,
the
rah, rah, right?
fathers. And if you're Protestant, you're going to roll your eyes and say, oh, cherry picking quotations and whatnot. And the thing that I always like to emphasize in that is, what moved me to the church, it wasn't just this quote or that quote of a church father, even though those quotes are very compelling evidence for the faith.
Right.
It was really that even before I encountered a lot of that material, I was a lover of history and I read a lot of history books. And I had a sense of, when you read enough history, you realize that history is not just about this person saying this or this person saying that. It's actually about how people lived, what people took for granted. And just the fact that St. Augustine woke up every day and put on robes and went into a basilica and was called Father and had an altar at which he served, right? That fact alone, it's not about his writings, really. It's the fact of the history of what it is what speaks so loudly. And so, that history was something that I realize now as a Protestant had kind of been hidden from me. I don't know purposefully, but at least there's a kind of conspiracy of silence around a lot of that history. And when that wall came down, I thought, there's really no choice but to become Catholic at this point because, you want to be where Jesus is, right? You don't want to be where you want to be. You want to be where God is. I use the example, I might be a Democrat, meaning a person for democracy, right? In the classic sense of the word. I might be for democracy, but if Jesus shows up and says, actually, I'm a monarchist, well, case is closed, I guess. I'll just become a monarchist. Like, I don't care about Henry VIII anymore. I'm going to jump on the monarchy bandwagon because that's whatever what Jesus wants, right?
Whatever Jesus wants.
Whatever Jesus wants, right? So, once you show that to me conclusively, it's like, okay, let's do it. So
it's funny you say that. I've had so many debates with people about which form of government is the best, and I can't decide personally, but everybody seems to have an opinion on it. And I've heard people from the monarchy side. I've heard people from we want a republic, we want a straight democracy, we want anarchy. It's like nobody can decide what they want. So I'm just kind of like, okay, well, what if we just take the best parts of each and I guess figure it out?
Which is kind of what the founders were supposed to have been trying to do, right? Yeah. No, that is interesting. I guess there has been a monarchy revival among maybe more traditional Catholic circles. I certainly encounter more of those arguments. More recently. So
yeah, it's been interesting. I'm sorry, where were you? You were still going through the story.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I guess probably one of the things that puzzles a lot of people is you can understand why someone like me might become Catholic, but how does a family of 7 siblings, 2 parents, how do we all come in at the same time? And like I said, there's a lot of things that God did in a bigger sense. My mother, Robin, and Annie, my older sister, went to Rome for an ecumenical event. Really before we were even considering becoming Catholic, we were just searching. And my mother had a kind of Pentecostal charismatic moment in St. Peter's Basilica. And she kind of fell to her knees and and cried a lot and really didn't know what had happened. She went back the next day and it was different. She didn't feel that at all, but she just had this moment where the Spirit touched her. And I think looking back, that, you know, it's interesting to me and as I studied the theology of the church, you know, the fact that there's a gift of faith, um, and that the Holy Spirit has to give you that faith. And I think the way I've experienced that is it's not just a sudden, you know, being struck by lightning, but it is an awareness that you're given suddenly that this is true.
Right.
That there's something real here that you need to pay attention to. And to me, I there's one moment in Saint Faustina's diaries that I've thought a lot about, where Jesus says to Saint Faustina, you know, the thing that hurts me the most is when people don't have faith.
Mhm.
And I've thought a lot about that, because it speared me at the time, because, you know, I'm probably like all of us, right? You know, there are times when I go, how is this going to work out? I mean, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? How, you know, how do you resolve this conundrum of the faith? And just the fact that God loves us so much that he wants us to believe in him, to trust him. And how much do I want my kids to trust me as their
Right.
dad? And how hurt would I be if I wasn't trusted by them? So that's something that I've thought a lot about, you know, really becoming Catholic. You have to just trust more and more the deeper you go. Um, and I think C.S. Lewis was a really good writer about this, where people, you know, we only go so far with God, and then we say, can't go any farther. Like, I can't. It's like Neo in the Matrix. Like, I can't leap off the building. I just can't, you know,
Yeah.
this is a bridge too far. And God always wants us to go deeper. He doesn't draw a line in there, you know. So yeah, I I hope
I
to
would
not
say
draw the line, you know, with
a,
him. So
a lot of people want to say, like, you know, God wouldn't let this happen, but then you read the book of Job and
yeah,
you realize what could happen, and it's like, okay, well, I'm not as tested as Job, so I think I'm okay for today. You know, that's
oh
kind of
yeah,
what I look at. You know,
oh yeah. Well, and too, I mean, you look at what's going on in the world today and
yeah,
all of the upheaval that we have, and the upheaval of past times, right? Even just in the last century, and uh, I think you realize that God. There are a few things you can say about God just based on history, and one of the things that I think you really can say about God is that God, uh, he's not concerned.
yeah, yeah.
Like, we're highly concerned. We're highly concerned that it'll break down. And God's like, well, let it break down. Let's see what happens. You know, it's like, yeah, and you're like, no, God, it can't break down.
Like,
We
please
need
no.
we need the Roman Empire. We need the Pope to be this way. We need the thing to do this way. We need the bishop. We need the, and it's like God's like, well, hey, let's just see what happens. You know, God is, and maybe that's a cavalier way of putting it, but it's kind of the only way I know how to, I guess, communicate what is in my brain. I really think God does sit back and sort of want things to play out, because he there's a sense of adventure that he has to have had in creating all of this that we don't plug into enough, right?
Well, it's like the second something bad happens, a lot of times people default into almost a Calvinist mindset, because
Hmm.
it's like, well, God's gonna do this and that. It's like, but God gave us free will, so it's things are going to break down, and we're just gonna have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Like that
Well,
until Jesus comes back. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
So
Well, and even when you think about like what it means for us to figure it out, you know,
yeah.
in my experience, to be quite honest, I've never figured anything out.
I guess what I meant
I
was let things play out, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. You know, what I have found, and my wife and I have talked about this all the time, right? Because when you're in the kind of business that we're in, I'm sure you feel the same way podcasting. There's just a kind of risk involved, a kind of adventure
Yeah.
that you have to have in doing it. Um, a belief that the time you're investing is blessing people. Um, and Yeah, and I think there's just an element of belief. I have a class of artists that I teach at our conservatory, and we just launched a college program recently, so I'm teaching more college age students in
That's cool.
aesthetics, in faith and aesthetics, which is one of my favorite classes. So we read books together and we discuss. It's more Socratic. But one of the things I talked with them about is just the fact that artists or creative people of any stripe, you have to believe in a way that very few people ever have to believe in anything.
Yes.
If you're a doctor, do you have to believe in medicine? It's like
Yeah.
you do, but it's sort of given to you, right? It's like, here are the rules, here are the things. Of course, the really good doctors are the ones who invent new medicine and they try new things, all those things. So it does bleed over. But if you're an artist, if you don't believe in your book, if you don't believe in your song, if you don't believe in your podcast, you're sunk.
Ain't going anywhere.
Right?
Yeah, it's not going anywhere.
You got to believe, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I try to, drill that home, and I think that's something that God looks down on and blesses, because I think that's the way Jesus lived. Right? Jesus woke up every day, and he had to believe. I was reading Anne Emmerich's visions of the Holy Family in Egypt.
Oh, you've read that one?
Amazing.
Those are awesome.
Yeah, they're amazing. And but when she's talking about Joseph and Mary living in this tent, or like a little shed by the temple in Hierapolis in Egypt, and how Joseph can't make any money because no one will pay him, and Mary's like sewing for a little extra on the side. How must they have felt? They must have said,
probably,
like, this is the what, like, we're gonna save the world. Jesus is gonna save the world. Here we are. We can't even feed ourselves hardly. And again, God must sit back and just enjoy the struggle, the adventure, the difficulty.
But the only reason you go through struggles like that is if you love what you're like, you love the vision, you love the faith, you love God, right?
Yeah. And even, that God also must look at all the struggles of Joseph and Mary, and that's part of why he loves them, is that they go through that. And so in the same way, how does God love me? Well, he doesn't just love me in the comfortable things. He loves me by sending me the difficult things, or the things that test me, because my life is a dramatic thing. It's an adventure. And my perspective should be that it's an adventure for me too. So I'm still learning that lesson. I don't know how. I'm sure I'll be pushed to a point where I'll have to learn it to a deeper point. Anyway.
Well, I mean, that I did listen to. I think you did an interview with, what was it, Cordial Catholic?
Yeah.
I gave that a listen just to kind of get a little idea of where your story was and stuff. So I've got a little bit of your backstory. So I might have you at a disadvantage because you don't know mine. But I was a cradle Catholic, so like I don't have a conversion story per se. I have more of a reversion story. And so I find like the conversion story kind of interesting because everybody comes from somewhere else,
Right.
And one of the things that happened to me was, like, during college, I actually got to see other faiths that weren't even Christian, because I went to a University of Michigan Dearborn, which is like the capital city of, you've got like the Chaldeans, so you do have Catholics up there, but you've also got like Muslims and Hindu and all of the other like Eastern religions all in one melting pot of a university. And so like I saw them taking their faith seriously, and I was like, well, what the heck was I doing as a kid? If these guys think their faith is like, the bee's knees, then why don't I? So then I started digging into my faith more, and my in-laws were a big part of that. And that was kind of the TLDR version of my reversion story. So like I didn't have the charismatic fall on your knees, but I've had a lot of similar moments throughout my life where it's like stuff just like pings you like lightning. I was like, where'd that come from?
Right.
And you know that there's a guy looking out for you upstairs somewhere. I'm not talking like the floor above me, above my basement. I'm talking about, somebody way up higher. But
it's not that old comedian from the 50s who always did the man upstairs gag. I can't remember who he was, but I'm sure the boomers out there would remember, but I don't.
But
So
what I have found, and this is something that is what I like about your show in it specifically, is the fact that it's not cringe. You know, a
oh yeah,
lot of these like Christian shows, especially stuff from a certain time period between like the year of the 1990s and the 2000s, aside from like the Veggie Tale stuff like that, but there was a lot of very what I would call cringe-worthy stuff that came out. It was
right.
like at the for the sake of being Christian, they threw out their creative ideas. You know,
Yeah.
that was kind of like what I saw. Whereas with your guys's program, I see kind of a revival in the creative Catholic space.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Oh
how do
yeah.
you
Well,
get there? Like what kind of a writing regimen? How does the brainstorming work for this thing?
oh gosh. Well, the creative genius behind Benjamin Cello in terms of the writing is Robin, my mother. So my parents are a couple of extraordinary people. They were both raised in Oklahoma,
Mhm.
um, in very modest circumstances. My mother sang with her family in a kind of backwoods trio for a long time. My father was a pianist, taught by his mother, who was a pianist. But both of them went to college for music at Oklahoma City University, and they met and they fell in love and got married. And as that happened, they also had this creative explosion where my father, and this happened kind of before college too, but he just learned to love jazz and chord progressions and became a 110%, my mother says, fluent pianist. He's one of these pianists you could just put down with any piece of music and he could do something with it. It's really remarkable. And then my mother, Robin, is a wordsmith. Her father was a preacher and a really eloquent man. So it was in her genes, I think, the word play. So they began to write lyrics and music together for Christian music. And by the time they started Benjamin Cello, which was a little bit before COVID, it was kind of 2019 that mom started writing those scripts. We did a pilot that we started to market around. They had been writing choir music for churches and children's musicals for 25 years. So they had a huge backlog of material that was just funny and clever. And I think if you do anything long enough, there's a kind of finesse and a nuance you get to it. So a lot of that natural humor and wit comes from just how good her writing is. I think also that in terms of you talking about cringe, I've meditated on that. What is cringe? Because when you're in the arts, especially in the Christian sphere, you encounter a lot of different creative people.
You do, yeah.
And a lot of the very sincere people.
Oh yeah, I'm not
People who
doubting
have
people's
money,
sincerity.
people who
When
have
I
money, they're
say
investing money and time.
when I
And
say that, I'm not saying that they have bad intentions.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not.
no, and I'm not. I don't want to imply that you
Yeah,
were at
yeah,
all.
and it's not like woke Hollywood either. So it's not like that either.
Right. Well,
So
but there is a mystery to it, I think.
there
And as
is,
a
yeah,
creative, someone in the creative arts, you kind of want to think about it because you don't want to be cringe yourself, right?
right.
Like you felt that everyone's felt uncomfortable when it's bad,
Yeah,
and you don't want to feel
yes,
that way. You don't want anyone else to feel that way. So, when does that happen? And I think the trick is um, that you have to know your craft.
yeah,
You have to know what makes something good or not.
yeah,
And that means you have to have studied it. So I think a lot of that is a lack of study, but I also think that some of it is people doing something because they think they have to,
yeah. That
or
could
they
be
feel
it.
like
Sure.
it's, whereas I feel like, in my experience, the things that have a really strong creative vision, they tend to not be cringe. It's almost
Yeah,
going back to the faith theme, like the more faith someone has, not in their personal religious walk, because who could say that? All
yeah,
of us are different, but the faith they have in the project, the clarity of their vision, and then if that's matched with technique, and excellence, it won't be cringe. I think even I've seen performers who were low on technique, but they had really high faith quotient in terms of just a belief in what they were doing. You can listen to Janis Joplin, go at it. And the one thing you can say is that she believed, right? She really, really believed in what she was doing. And I'm not making any statement about her for better or for worse, but there are people who they just sell you on what they're doing. And I think that 9 times out of 10, if something's cringe, it's because someone actually didn't believe enough to try harder. It's kind of lukewarm. If they had believed more, they would have worked harder. It would have been better. So I don't know.
Well, isn't that like, doesn't that literally match up with Jesus talking about it's worse to be lukewarm than have no faith or good faith?
Yeah, in the book of Revelation, right?
That's
He talks
right, yeah.
about I think it's the church of Laodicea. He says, "I'm going to spit you out of my mouth."
Yeah,
because you're lukewarm, which is that's something you certainly hope Jesus never says about you.
well, yes, you hope not.
Yeah.
But it would apply to a lot of things in life, I think. Like if you're not fully on board with something, it's almost better to just not get on board at all.
Yeah, well, and Jesus said there's I remember I was just reading in Luke the other day, the when he talks to the guy and he says, anyone who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is not worthy of my kingdom. And he tells the man, I got to go bury my father. And he says, well, no, let the dead bury the dead. That's a passage to meditate on.
Oh yeah.
Because I spent some time just thinking about that passage when I was revisiting it. And it's fascinating because, burying your father, there's no more noble thing, right? Maybe. I mean, I can't hardly think of something more noble than burying your father.
Yeah, that's pretty
Jesus
hard to walk away from.
Yeah, let the dead bury the dead. And I always hesitate to say, and what Jesus was meaning was, because I think Jesus is like, he's God. He's saying these things, and there's a reason we don't grasp them because they're divine sayings. There's so much in there that is mysterious. But the one thing that I did take away was, stop asking questions. We're all, who do you need to serve today? Well, your wife, right? I mean, we all know that. Who do you need to serve today? Your kids, right?
Yep.
What do you need to do today? Your job. What do you need to? Yep. It's like we always are asking questions, and Jesus's point is, why are you asking questions all the time? Just do your life joyfully, and don't second guess it. So maybe that's the theme of this podcast is just we're all overly concerned about ourselves in some ways.
The one takeaway I thought was interesting about the interview you did with, I think it was the Cordial Catholic. It might have been a different one, but I remember you saying like one of the things that had you guys convert was the traveling all the time and seeing all the different evangelical parishes being different, and there was a lack of faith in some and full faith in others, and it was kind of weird probably seeing all of that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we grew up, my siblings and I, in what I would call it was non-denominational, but it was kind of a Bible believing, Bible centric raising, which I'm very grateful for. I mean, my parents invested a lot of time in. We would read scripture together as a family growing up. We would pray together as a family.
Right.
So we had a very healthy home life spiritually. But church was always this kind of tangential thing out here. And we would go to different churches for periods of time. But inevitably you would kind of, leave, or it's, it would fade, or, the church that was the hot thing now. And there was a great pastor and a great sermon, and, there would be a scandal or things would fall away. And so the vision I grew up with of the church was of kind of this amorphous, invisible network really, of people that may or may not agree on doctrine, may or may not agree on the foundations of the faith, and that that can work, at least psychologically,
Yeah.
if you think that you really hold these core beliefs in common,
Right.
about Christ, about I don't know, like mainly moral questions. It's funny because when I was a Protestant, you would have debates about all these fundamental questions that as a Catholic, I now realize are just, it's insanity that they were ever negotiable to begin with, right? Baptism, communion. I mean, it's crazy to think that those things are negotiable but
Debatable.
but the things that were not negotiable were things like homosexuality or um, you know, uh, I don't know,
Cultural
war or
issues and
tradition. Like there
yeah,
were all these. It was all these moral issues, right?
moral and cultural issues were
Right, moral and
non-negotiable.
cultural issues that were non-negotiables, and you kind of felt safe as long as you felt that the church you were attending upheld those things.
Right.
And what we began to see was that the culture shift in America that all of us are aware of at this point. I mean, it's totally
Yes.
dominated our lives at this point,
Right.
to some degree or another, depending on where you live. That this was happening to evangelical churches.
Yep.
And, I guess it happened to mainline Protestantism a long time ago, but it hadn't really hit evangelicalism, which was where we were playing a lot of our concerts. We were doing a lot of things in that space. And so that caused us to, I guess, a couple of things. One was that we've struggled to know where to attend because we just got burned out with the model of evangelicalism. And the model of evangelicalism, and I have a lot of friends that are still part of this, so I say this with all love and respect.
Right.
But the model of evangelicalism is Holy Spirit, come to us today. It's the pastor gets up, opens the scriptures. I hope that something I'm going to say is going to change the way you live today. We hope that the songs we're singing is going to impact our hearts or change the way we live today. And that's great insofar as it goes. But what the Catholic Church teaches is that God always is there already.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to
God
invite
is
him in.
there in the tabernacle waiting for us. Now, if that's a lie, it's the worst lie ever devised. It's totally cruel. But if it's true, it means that it's just on another level spiritually,
Right.
because it's God. God is there. God is waiting for you in the Eucharist. God is waiting for you in the confessional. He's given us the sacraments so that we can experience him in this deeper way. And you would no more, do the other thing than you would use flint and wood when you could have a blowtorch, right? It's, like if you're in the wilderness in the winter, you want to have the bigger gun, the bigger fire creator. So and of course, one of the things I always should say this is, I have a lot of sympathy for people on the outside of the church. I know that it's probably very strange, because I felt it was strange at the time, to look in through the windows of the Catholic Church and say, do they really believe that? Could that really be true? Because all you've known is life outside the city walls, right?
Yeah.
Life outside. And it can be hard to believe that this is actually what Christ intended. But if you open your mind up and you say, hey, let's look into this and just take our time considering it, then slowly you begin to see, you know what? Christ didn't want to leave us orphans. He didn't want to leave us without a roadmap to heaven. It was not about me and my Bible figuring it out. Like, that's way more stress and pressure than God ever intended for us to have. He wants us to have a Bible. He wants us to read it. He wants us to gain all that. But if my salvation is me figuring it out, that's not what Christ intended. And that's why we have the church. So,
and there's a lot of saints who are described as having simple faith. So clearly it's not like you have to delve into the theologian space to become a saint.
Right.
Which are all of our goals should be hopefully to become a saint. Even just a lowercase saint in heaven would be great enough for me. You know, I'm totally fine with that. You know, even if I got to spend
Well,
some time.
That's why, and I maybe, I don't know if I should share my Twitter handle, but I guess I will. My Twitter handle is the Saint's Kid Brother.
Yeah.
And I've had people, say, well, you can't be anonymous on Twitter. I'm like, I'm not anonymous. I just don't want to. It's like the name is just lame, right? You don't want to be more. But I liked that Twitter handle because that's how I feel. It's like I want the saints to pray for me like they pray for their kid brother. It's like, God, remember little Benjamin over there,
Yeah. I get it. I get it.
So anyway.
So I guess since you're a musician and you sing, what would you say about the music in church? How do you feel? Like, you guys are kind of bringing some like the older hymns into your show, correct?
Yeah. So, I think let me start with Benjamin Cello. So Benjamin Cello, one of the things that we wanted to do was to be educational in the show,
right,
in terms of the faith,
right.
And
I appreciate that, by the way.
Yeah, because what we found, even in our teaching at the conservatory, the school that we started here in Columbia, that you would encounter Christians who, they may or may not even be going to church, right? They would say they're Christian, they're believing in a sense, but they're just not encountering any of the great songs of the faith. And I mean, Amazing Grace. I mean, I remember, I'm sure you remember, in the 90s, you'd have David Foster and Josh Groban on the piano, PBS special, songs for the children.
Yeah.
And they would sing timeless songs like Amazing Grace that everyone's supposed to know. And today, Generation Z doesn't. Generation Alpha definitely doesn't.
Yeah.
So,
well, my kids do, but
yeah. So every so often we do insert hymns into the show to have that rootedness, have that tradition come through, which I think is special. My father serves as the music minister at our parish here in Columbia. So even there, I know what part of his vision is trying to what I think Vatican II actually was trying to do, which is trying to basically fuse the tradition that the church has always treasured in chant and in other things, but also allow for the best of more modern songwriting and hymn writing to merge with that. And so that people feel both drawn upward to something higher, which is, I think, what Gregorian chant and the ancient music of the church does best. But also to, I think the arts also are supposed to be an emotional experience for people. And I think there's a power in singing a very simple hymn that it may not be a high Gregorian chant, but maybe it's a hymn you sang when you were a boy or a little girl, and it's full of a simple truth and the power of that truth over time, even though it's simple, even though it's more modern, quote unquote, still feels traditional. It can carry you through emotionally in a way that I think is unique to that art form. And that's why I think it's good that the church has embraced hymnody, more modern hymnody, not Chris Tomlin hymnody, but like 1890s hymnody maybe. But yeah, no, I think that the church moves on. That's something we aspire to, I think, in Benjamin Cello. And I think that at our best, we do achieve that there's a sense of writing a new classic, right?
Yeah,
it's not just about, you watch a Benjamin Cello episode and you think this feels like Mr. Rogers, but it's not Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
It feels like Mary Poppins, but it's not Mary Poppins. And I think I think that if the world had that sense of tradition, but moving forward, that says that your civilization is alive. I actually think, and I might get myself in trouble for this, I actually think that some elements of traditionalism fail that test because it's too backward looking. And I know I can hear the people throwing tomatoes at my screen. but if you can only resurrect, as important as that is, you have to be able to carry it forward. And it doesn't mean that you have to write a pop song. Like, there's nothing that says pop music is what modernity has to be. Modernity could be anything, right?
Yeah.
The future could be anything we want it to be. So it could be that you're writing a new Gregorian chant. It could be that you're writing something that's a brand new classic. But I think that every artist, no matter what your persuasion is, should be creating things for the future, not just looking backward. And I think that there's some really good people doing great work. Like, I listen to the group Floriani. That's a Catholic group, and they're writing new original chants that are beautiful and thoughtful. So, yeah.
Yeah, I may have misphrased what I was trying to say because I was having a hard time coming up with the question, but you answered exactly what I was kind of going after there.
Oh, good. Okay.
Because, like, obviously we would not have Allegri's Miserere if he just kept doing what was already there.
Yeah.
Because that was new when he wrote that rendition of it, that composition. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
is beautiful. You know, it's one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard in my life. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, part of the difficulty, I think, if you're thinking musically, and this is something that most people are not aware of because they haven't studied music in a historical sense, but there are two things happening in our time at once, and they're confusing. They confuse each other. The first thing that's happening is that our education is collapsing.
Yeah.
In terms of people's ability to write great music and people's ability to project things into the future. And so what tends to happen is that people tend to learn guitar, learn a few chords, and they plug into pop music because it's easy.
Yeah.
And so then people come along who are maybe more classical or more traditional, and they say, wait a minute, do y'all understand what's happening? If we continue on this road, pretty soon jazz won't even exist, right? Pretty soon, and these things are more recent in the history of music, right? So, because if everything gets simplified, if everything gets dumber, then eventually we'll have nothing. So there's that trajectory. But at the same time, and this is where I think the traditionalist mindset can miss something, there is a real creative development that has happened in Western music, even to our own day. And the real creative development that has happened is technological. So, like, the invention of the electric guitar is a serious move in the musical space. Doesn't mean that I want an electric guitar in mass. That's not my point. But my point is that there is a development that happens, and human nature keeps creating new things. So the church is always in a dialogue with, you know, how do we engage what the world is doing, and how do we meet it in a way? And
well, you get the electric organ too, which means you can put an organ in a space you couldn't prior.
Right, exactly.
So, like, I agree with you on that.
And so I think the problem there is, you know, we're too boxed in because we think, well, we've either got to keep the old organ or we're going to do the electric guitar and the drums. And it's like, no.
Yeah, there are things in between that.
Yeah, there are things in between, and also things that are just completely different, right? Like, you could imagine that we could return to more ancient art forms, but those would be infused with chord progressions and voicings that no one would have done before the 20th century. And so that's a real development. So development will always happen. You can't stop development. I think is primarily what I'm trying to say, but recognizing that and embracing it, I think, is part of what the Catholic Church ought to do. You know, like Pope Leo right now, you know, I would love it if he were to come out and really do what he's doing in all the little, you know, signals, which is to say, guess what? We can meet in the middle and have all the most beautiful things and all of the most normal things, right?
The
Like,
closest you got to that was with Benedict the 16th with his hermeneutic of continuity prior
right,
to, because he was trying to kind of find some middle ground between the new mass and the old tradition.
right. Um, yeah, I think so. And I'm very hopeful in seeing the way that our new pope is conducting himself and the signals that he's sending, because I think it could be exactly what the church needs
It
at this
seems
point.
like he's embracing as much good as he can find in everything out there.
Yeah.
But time will tell. Obviously, we're all hopeful. Anytime you have like a change in leadership, there's like a level of hope that whatever it is you're clamoring for is going to come out, and whatever the new leadership is, right? With
Right.
any organization that you're involved in.
Mhm.
Although I have to ask, like, what has it been like working with your family as long as you have?
Oh, it's been wonderful. It's one of the things that I remember once. I think I've told the story before. Someone asked me, like, how can you get along with your family members on the road, like touring? And, our response to that was, well, how does a group of four guys fresh out of college do it? That barely know each other. Um, there's lots of pressures that come from being in the creative space. And frankly, we've done it long enough now. We've done it over 20 years since we started the Annie Moses Band. So in that time, we visited a church recently. We performed, and the pastor of this church interviewed Annie, and he said, Annie, I don't know anyone that 20 years ago is still even touring from when y'all started. Like, people just quit. They find something else to do. Like, how have you gone so long? And I know the answer to a large extent is just family, that we have each other. You have a support system to carry through the ups and downs of this kind of life of creating things. And also I would say that with with sibling dynamics, it's I think there's a real blessing in embracing the people in your life and accepting them and working with them. And that's something that I think people struggle with, um, because maybe you're raised in a family context. You may or may not feel like that's a good context. Some people leave it, they're kind of rejecting it. Some people liked it, but then they have to jump ship, create a whole different context with their, the family they create with their spouse. And then you have that dynamic. And then you have the dynamic of the families maybe in your parish or whatnot. But the one thing that you almost never have to do is continue to relate to the same person, except maybe your spouse, for more than about 10 years.
Right.
Right. And so that expiration date, and that's a kind of modern weirdness, actually, that
It
we
is
have.
100% a modern
Be-
weirdness.
because if you teleported back even 150 years, people would be like, what? You don't live in the town you were born in? What? You don't work with your dad at the mill? What? You didn't learn your trade from the guy down the road? Um,
This is
and
such a
yeah, there can
relevant
be.
this is an extremely relevant discussion to what
Uh-huh.
I was talking with Bug Hall about this like a week or two ago.
Hmm.
And he was talking about how, because they're going to be living off the land that they bought in Arkansas, and so he's going to instill that kind of family value in his kids. But it sounds like, in a more kind of a modern music way, you guys managed to do that with your creative aspirations with your parents and
Hmm.
maintain that sibling closeness and excel in an industry that your family basically grew up in. So like, you're kind of doing the same thing in a different way, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, the mentally, I would compare what we do to what people used to do. I mean, if you look at the life of Bach, say,
Yeah.
Johann Sebastian Bach, the Bach, he was, I think, third or fourth generation musician. he was stealing his brother's manuscripts from his secret collection to like study them when he was a young boy. So, and that was the family trade, right? Like, and
that's what I mean. Like you guys are
yeah,
doing it's not like, I hate saying modern music, but it is like modern. You guys are doing new music. Maybe
right,
that'd be a better way to say it.
yeah,
But following the old school way that it was done. Does that make sense?
yeah. No,
Because
and
you're following in the footsteps of the family business, and
right.
you're doing the creative thing, and I'm just saying I admire that. I hope that one day I'll have something I can pass on to my own children in a way like that.
Mhm.
Although the bulk of people, they can't pass that on because you're in like an industrial job somewhere working for A, B, or C company,
Right,
and
right.
you can't pass that job on. You can hope your kids get hired into the same company and teach them, but like you could have grown up watching your parents do their job, learn their job, do that same thing, and now you are. I mean,
Mhm.
really, because your parents were creatives in the music industry, right?
Right. No, that's exactly right. And I even look at our own children. My children are still pretty young. My oldest
Yeah,
is 7.
7. Okay, so your kids are close to my kids' ages.
Yeah, yeah. But like my sister Annie's children, you've seen them on Benjamin Cello, right? Like they've
Yeah,
literally grown up on that show.
which is
And,
cool.
I watch some of them perform at showcases or recitals we'll do at our school, and they are just pros. I mean, they're really good, way better than I was at the age of 11 or 13. I was a pretty good cellist, but I was not a speaker, entertainer. These are things that I learned on the road really through my teenage years with the band. But they've, you know, learned how to act and how to be on camera um I
And it's more of a family
yeah.
dynamic with the two, so you're not like sending them off to some studio in Hollywood like a lot of child actors do. They're doing it in the family environment of the show you guys are creating,
Right, yeah.
which is
So,
cool.
and yeah, and that really is something that I will credit to my parents, because my mother Robin is a truly visionary person, and she has a gift to organize a world for her community, which is obviously her family, but also the wider community. I'll have conversations with my mom. My mom, where she'll say, that guy at church, he would do this amazing. Like he just is a natural at X. And you talk to him, and he's like, really? And and she just has a gift, and I won't even see it. I'll be like, well, maybe I think that's a good idea, and then he'll be in a play that we do, or he'll do something, and he's great, and you go, how did you know
God, yeah,
that
how do
he
you see
would do
this?
that great? And so we benefit a lot from her vision, and so I think it does take a visionary. um but yeah, I do think that God wants families to do more things together. And I even see that in the culture. I saw an interview with Tom Hanks, the movie star, talking about how he and his kids, they're all in acting and they all do things together. And the interviewer was like, "Isn't that kind of weird?" And he's like, "No, we're a family." And I think 10 years ago, the culture was different. People did think
Mhm.
it was weird. I got a lot more questions about that when we were touring initially, but I think that something has shifted. Primarily because I think, we live in what they call liquid modernity, right? Things change
Yeah,
so fast. You really do want to, like your friend, Bug Hall, the desire to be on land in community. Like we own about 50 acres out here, uh, in Columbia, and I just built a house up the road. My brother's building a house in the back. We have our studio where we do our work. Um, And I don't know how many people have told me, we would like something like that. We would love for our family or our friends to be in proximity to each other. And I don't think that was happening in the 90s. I don't think people were
no,
talking that way in the 80s. I think something has changed for the better. And I'm excited to see what it leads to, because it seems like God is doing it.
I think that vision of community was lost quite a bit in probably since about the 60s, I would think, was when that started happening, because you never see the effect of something until it's had like 20 plus years to develop, because you start where you are and then the vision is eventually reached, right? So like
Right.
where we're at right now, the vision, I would say, of people is like to get near your family and friends and develop that sense of community. So like we won't see the fruits of this for a good 10, 20, maybe 30 years down the road. But I think it is a good direction. But like you said with the vision thing, like some people have the vision and they can implement it. It sounds like your mom is one of those people. Like you
Oh
don't.
yeah, she's someone who she can walk into a room and, you know, bring people together toward a goal. It's a incredible gift to see her use for the kingdom. But yeah, I do think that um, we're living in an interesting time, and I think that uh, part of what will happen over time is that people will discover that, like you're saying, from the 60s on, we were kind of living through an odd episode in
Yeah.
history. Uh, I like to read mystery novels. That's what
Yeah.
kind of one of my guilty pleasures. I love golden age mysteries. So I'm not a big Agatha Christie fan. I'm actually kind of an Agatha Christie critic, but I love the other women of the golden age of mystery. So you have like Nio Marsh, who's amazing. She's a great writer. Dorothy Sayers, who's one of my favorites. She was a friend of C.S. Lewis. But you read those stories and they're from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, right? Kind of before our cultural epoch.
Did you ever try Father Brown then?
Oh, I love Father Brown. Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Chesterton.
good.
Yeah. That's amazing. But you read those stories and it was another world, right? I mean, it was a world where the milkman was leaving milk on your door. And I
Yeah.
remember there's one mystery where Lord Peter Wimsey, Sayers' detective, he's like, we've got to call the grocer to get the beef delivered, you know, and it's, you're like, wow, this was a different economy. Like it was very like
Yeah.
everything's glass. There's no plastic. It's all metal and whatnot. And yeah. And then that world vanished with the Second World War, right? It just, it blew itself up and we got the world we have now, which is, you know, no fault divorce and
No fault
contraception
divorce
and
is horrible.
plastics, and you know it's just a
Yeah.
very, very different world. It's one of the reasons why I kind of stick up for Vatican II a little bit, because I really don't think that the Council Fathers, they weren't thinking of our world when they wrote the
No.
documents of Vatican II. They were thinking about C.S. Lewis's world. They were thinking about the world they had grown up in, which was just a different place. So yeah, I think that we're reaching a point where we're all looking back and saying, you know what, do we really have to live in the brave new world? Do we have to live in the world of plastic and the world of, you know, no fault divorce and abortion and all of these things? And we don't have to, you know, we can change it.
And it takes the culture changing first before you start getting the laws changing.
Right. And one thing I will say about I think is very true is that the way we worship God informs how we live our lives.
Absolutely. That
So
is
the
100%
one
true.
thing I will say that I think in traditionalist circles, the one truth that is preached a lot that is absolutely true is that the world was a more lofty place when our worship of God was more lofty. And there was a reason why Cary Grant wore a suit in the world of the traditional Latin Mass. Like those
Yeah.
two things are connected. And I'm not, I don't know what that means exactly. Like I think there
Yeah.
that suggests something, but I think it is a truth. And so I hope that, you know, what we're doing, you know, we have a new album that we're going to release later this year, hopefully, called Under the Tree of Life. It's sacred songs that we've been writing for about over a decade. And it's a blend of classical, traditional song forms, but also kind of more of a simple folk um, aesthetic. It kind of blurs those lines, and these are deeply spiritual songs. Settings of the Lord's Prayer, settings of the Prayer of St. Francis, 1 Corinthians 13, a lot of scriptures, and so when we release an album like that, what we're hoping is that, you know, what we're doing, what other people are doing creatively is going to show a chapter for the church, so that we aren't always fighting a battle internally about, do we sing that back in the 1970s? You know, we don't, that doesn't have to be what the debate is about, nor does it have to be, do we have to go back to the chant from 1100? There's something else I think that the Spirit wants from the church at this moment. But I think it'll only come with education and vision. And that's why actually what we do at the conservatory is so important. And we that's a whole other thing. But what we hope to do is to reverse that to some extent.
I have to say, one of the funniest debates I've heard on liturgical music in general is I've heard, and this is at parishes in my area, so I'm not going to name any names. I don't want to get anybody angry with me or anything, but there's this conversation going on between like several music ministers in the area where like one of them's like, I want to do Gregorian chant. And they're like, well, we can't do that old stuff. We got to do what's in the hymnals. And I look at the hymnal and every song was written in the 70s. And I'm like, so instead of holding to like, you know, the tradition of the church, we're holding to the tradition of the 1970s and we're locking in there forever.
Right.
And I'm like, neither of those opinions are how we move forward here. Although
Right.
I would rather hear the stuff before the 1970s than the stuff that happened in the 1970s.
Right. Well, the reason you want to hear it is because it was good.
Yes.
It was good. But someone today can still write something that's good.
Exactly. No, I don't disagree with that at all. I like the
right.
premise of
And so, you know, I want to hear good stuff too in church. And so I think part of it is that I think of Donald Trump, you know, he says, you know, they're not sending their best. He was talking about people coming over the border.
Yeah.
Like, they're not sending their best. It's like whenever I open up the hymnal to the 70s writing, it's like, we weren't sending our best, you know. It's just not great stuff, broadly speaking. But at the same time, you know.
But if you like folk music, you're in good hands.
Yeah. But I think you know, we also, not to play the historian too much, but we also just forget that after the Second World War, our whole society, our whole civilization,
it was
in such a disoriented state. And what the church was trying to do, what the church is still trying to do, even if you watch Pope Leo closely, is to try to orient us. It's trying to say, hey, the world is spinning out of control and we can be the reference point. And we really haven't stopped spinning out of control, right? Technology and AI and everything, we're spinning faster and faster. And I think that as dark as the world might seem, that there's also a great hope that we can offer the world as Catholics, that, you know, maybe the place when we will shine the brightest is right now and in the decades to come. So that, anyway, that's my hope. That's certainly what we hope with all that we're doing, whether it's Benjamin Cello or Chalk and Block or Under the Tree of Life or anything else what we're doing. So
I'm definitely looking forward to hearing you guys' new music. When do you think that's coming out? Do you guys have a date yet?
So we are hoping to travel on a music video filming tour. We've done this once before, where we went camping out west, and we did it for an album we did called American Rhapsody. We went and filmed out in the Mountain West. But we want to be a tour of churches. Yeah. And we want to create video content, because in today's world, an album doesn't exist unless there's video content with it. So the audio is wrapped, but we have to do a lot of filming. But we're hoping to release it later this year. So, yeah, we actually performed it at the Kennedy Center a year from the election. So it was back in 2023. And we had Jim Caviezel, who's one of our favorite actors, come and do some of the scriptures and narrations as part of it. And it was just a great night.
Jim Caviezel's awesome.
He's amazing. He was a great guy, really fun to meet. And it was amazing to us because at the time we lifted it up as a prayer for our nation, because we thought, we have this election coming up. The world has just seemed so divided. And so there was an intention behind a lot of the prayers that we lifted up that night for just healing and for vision. And I really think that we're seeing that. I'm not making any statements about Trump necessarily. But I do think that there is, with Pope Leo, even people like J.D. Vance, who's a Catholic, and I know that he's a controversial figure, but I think that there is a shift happening where, just the other day, I think Trump announced the Kennedy Center, they're going to celebrate Jesus at Christmas, and they're not going to do all the woke stuff anymore. And I was like, that's a step in the right direction. I don't know that, will the bad outweigh the good with all the things happening in our culture? I'm not going to claim that, but I do see signs of life. Whereas what we were heading toward in 2020, I do think that was the Antichrist. I think the mass shutting down,
that was awful.
The darkness, the bending of the knee, the weird psychological manipulation that went on, the black squares on Instagram. I know no one likes to remember all that, but that was, I think, whatever the end of the world will feel like, it'll feel kind of like 2020. It'll feel like everyone has to bow to the idol or get canceled. And so I think anything that fights against that, even if it's very imperfect, is probably better. So, even what's happening in LA and stuff, I think, and I'm not for, evil immigration policies or cruel immigration policies, but anarchy, in the spirit of anarchy, that is the spirit of lawlessness. It's the spirit of the Antichrist, and it
neither anarchy nor communism are compatible with the Catholic Church and our belief system. So there has to be an order to immigrate. Anything that is going to happen for the benefit of mankind, there has to be an order to it. Right? God establishes an order. So if we want to have immigration, it needs to be ordered and it needs to be understood. You can't just have random stuff happening and expect things to work out well. You know what I mean?
It never works out well in that.
For example, actually, I don't have a good example. Just the pure chaos is not good. You don't want.
Well, I mean, chaos. And if you look back again, I'm playing you. I love history, so you'll have to forgive me another historical illusion. But you watch these recreations like Dwight Eisenhower and the people who planned D-Day. I mean, these are such impressive men planning these massive operations. And could we do that today? It's like, I read someone the other day, he was saying, America hasn't won a war in 30 years. I mean, everything we've touched for 30 years has not gone very well.
We can't
now,
even
the Israelis, on the other hand, apparently are really
they've had some serious
it's pretty crazy to see what they're able to accomplish. So I don't know. I hope that we turn the corner and go back to that kind of competency, but we definitely need it on the border and on these other questions for sure. So
we can't even do a military exit back out strategy well. So there's that, with the what happened. It was, I don't remember if it was Afghanistan or Iraq or one of those countries. We were,
I think it was
with Biden. Yeah, whichever one it was, but it was horrible. I remember every day was more casualties, people left behind. We can't even do that well. That's bad. But
it is. Yeah.
That has nothing to do with Benjamin CELLO. So I apologize for the tangent on that.
Our conversation has carried us far afield, but
it has.
No, yeah.
So what is cello your favorite instrument then?
Oh, obviously. I mean, I love it. I play it. If I was going to learn another instrument, I'd probably learn piano because I love Chopin and Debussy. Um, but yeah, no, I love cello. I'm very grateful to play it. Um, and I think it speaks to people in a special way.
It's a
There was
very
a funeral
beautiful
at our
instrument.
parish some time ago, and I was able to play for that. And I, I, I'm very blessed because I've received a lot of love from people, I think, who have been blessed by just the instrument. They love the instrument. Um, and I think it touches something inside people, especially in difficult times.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know, it's mysterious. It's not something in me. It's something God put into this instrument, that I'm blessed to get to share. Um, so yeah, no, I love it. I love that it's a part of my life for sure.
And it's funny, like there's been so many shows where like you see the artists on the shows are clearly like either lip syncing or they're like strumming wrong, like they're going to a lower chord, but on the guitar they're actually going to a higher chord, the way they're moving their fingers and stuff. So when I saw you coming on with the cello and I saw the way your hands are moving, I was like, no, he's playing. Like that is him playing the instrument. He knows what
Yeah.
he's doing. Because my brother played the viola, so I had a little bit of experience with seeing how the fingers move with string instruments like that. So I
Yeah.
knew right away, like, no, that guy's playing the instrument. So I immediately had some respect for that.
Yeah, no, I have played all the cello on the show. I think there's only been one episode where I faked it, but it was only because I won't tell you which one, but it was only because my dad hadn't written the part yet. And so
Okay.
he was just like, "Well, write a part, you know, play it later." And so I made up something, and then later on I was like, "Huh, I wonder what that was." But it's still me. You're still hearing me. It's just the visual and the audio are a little different.
A little bit different. Yeah, yeah. I'll have to look. Maybe I'll figure it out. We'll see.
Yeah, most of the time it's the same for sure. But anyway.
I did have a question from a friend of mine. He asked his daughter if he had any questions she had any questions for Benjamin Cello. And the question was whether or not you've ever seen a whale.
Have I ever seen a whale?
I'm not sure where that question came from, but that's what he
Yeah, that's
wanted to know.
interesting. I've never I maybe I have seen a I don't know if I've seen a killer whale in like a SeaWorld exhibit, maybe.
Yeah.
There's like SeaWorld and of
Yeah,
course
before everything got shut down
before
with that.
everything
Yeah.
got shut down.
Yeah.
I think when I was little, I might have seen one of those, but I know I've seen dolphins in
Yeah.
that context. But yeah, there are certain as I get older, I get more nostalgic for the 90s. I don't know if I don't know how old are you, Chris? Are you?
This is the year I turned 33. My kids keep reminding me, they're like, that's
Oh,
the year, when everything happened with Jesus. And I'm like,
yeah,
yes, it is. And I'm
yeah.
like, hopefully that doesn't happen to me, kids, because then I won't be around anymore. Let's put it that way.
That's when you realize Jesus was a young man. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. But it's funny.
um,
They just keep reminding me, like, that's the age Jesus was. And I'm like, yes, you're
yeah.
right, kids.
Yeah, but no, when I think back at things that are kind of 90s coded,
Yeah.
like SeaWorld or Killer Whales and Free Willy and all this stuff, I get nostalgic. Which tells me that I am getting old. I guess that only increases with age. You start to miss your childhood stuff, but it's like
So you would have been,
I actually have 3 VHSs that my brother-in-law gave me. One is Jurassic Park, the original Star Wars,
there you go.
and I think Indiana Jones or something. But I hold them. I don't even have a VHS player, but I hold them, and I suddenly teleport back to Blockbuster circa
Yep.
1995. And there's just a feeling that you have holding that VHS. It's the kinetic thrill of a 10-year-old or 8-year-old. Good video.
Isn't that funny how quickly the technology progressed during our lifetimes?
It is. It is
Because
pretty
I mean, we
remarkable.
go from landline telephones to everybody's got a cell phone in their pocket. You go from VHS and television to Blu-rays are gone basically now, except for the people that want them.
Yeah.
And you got Kindle e-readers. People barely hold on to books anymore. It's wild.
It is wild. And I think that I don't know. Have you ever heard of Marshall McLuhan? He's a
That's
interesting
maybe.
thinker. He was a writer, like I think in the 60s and 70s more, but he's famous because he coined the term "the medium is the message."
Yeah.
And I think that's really true today, where it's like the fact that the phone itself is what's changing us, not even what's on the phone. Like we think it's
Yeah.
what we're hearing or what we're reading, but really it's that feeling of separation that's kind of growing on us over time. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it'll all turn out.
Now,
There
are
are
you
times
a
when I
big
think I'll
reader?
be a Luddite and I'll destroy all my devices. And then other times I'm like, can't live without them, right?
I see a lot of books on the shelf behind you. Are
Oh,
you a big reader?
I am a big reader, not as big as I used to be, sadly. I find that when I was 11, I read, I think, 1,000 pages in 4 weeks or something. It was like I would blow through 19th century novels. That was
Yeah.
my thing. I loved Dumas, uh, and which is actually not really great literature, but it's in the great literature section,
Well,
And
I guess it depends. Are you talking like Count of Monte Cristo, Three Musketeers? Where are we at?
well, I loved Count of Monte Cristo growing up.
That's a
I
great.
actually wept because I bought the abridged version of the Count of
Oh,
Monte
geez.
Cristo, and then I found the unabridged version in Barnes and Noble, and I realized that
How
I had
much
read
was
like a
missing?
third of the length of what it was. I didn't realize till I was older that the unabridged version contains all sorts of stuff that was completely inappropriate for 11-year-old to be reading.
Yeah.
But the abridged version was very clean and nice, and I loved it. So yeah, no, I loved adventure novels growing up from the 19th century. But I would read tons growing up, and now I honestly listen more to books
Oh,
because I find
audiobooks?
that I'm in the car.
Yeah.
I'll subscribe to Audible until I am like 3 or 4 credits behind,
Yeah.
and then I'll cancel it because I can't just keep spending money for credits I'll never use.
Yeah.
But so I try to keep up. I'll on vacation I try to read. Whenever I do have a vacation, which is very rare. But yeah, but I love books. I truly love them, and if I get a book for a birthday or Christmas, that's the best gift I could get. I may not even crack it, but I will love that I received it because I love books. So,
Well, who are your favorites? I know you've mentioned C.S. Lewis in regards to the show. Is he one of your favorite authors?
oh yeah, I mean Lewis. I've probably read everything Lewis ever wrote, except maybe I don't think I ever read Study in Words. There's a couple of books that are like a little more deep cuts of his, but I've
Mhm.
read everything by him multiple times.
What's your favorite fiction and what's your favorite nonfiction by
Oh
him?
boy, favorite fiction. I well, I think Till We Have Faces is his best book.
That
Just
is a
straight up,
great book.
it's a great book, and it's his best book straight up. But I think my favorite personally, which is kind of a different thing, like you can say this is
Yeah.
objectively the best thing guy wrote, but the
Yeah.
thing you love the most is his space trilogy. I think
Yep.
his space trilogy is just really cool. It's really fun to read. I've reread it multiple times. Um,
Which one's the
but
best in the trilogy?
Paralandra, I think you have to say
Yes. Yes.
ransom, ransom.
I
It's
know
just
the idea that the devil never sleeps has never left my mind since I read that
yeah.
book.
Oh, it's good stuff. It's really good stuff. And yeah, I mean, in terms of nonfiction, I love fiction. I really am. I know that I've heard some people on podcasts more recently, they talk about, that they love nonfiction or they love history or things. And I love history, like as you can tell, but I love creative literature. I've loved it since I was little. And I think people like Lewis, they were doing something that, going back to Vatican II, they were doing something Vatican II wanted to do. Something I've been ruminating on recently, which is, what was the move of the spirit in the 20th century? Because in Catholic circles, at least the ones I run in, and I have an insular world, so it's probably not very broad, but I always run into people talking about, well, everything went off the rails in the 20th century, or everything's been bad. And I want to go, well, hold on, because I have an English degree. I studied at the University of London in their distance program, and I did big surveys of periods of literature. It's very interesting to see how the Augustines were writing, what was going on at the time versus what the Romantics were writing, what was going on at the time, the way that culture and art and faith all are interacting together. And what you see is that from really John Henry Newman through C.S. Lewis, even into Pope Benedict, there is a very clear continuity, a very clear, even an aesthetic that is, you read what Ronald Knox, who's, by the way, one of the greatest detective fiction writers ever.
Yes, he is.
You liked it? Oh, you've read it? It's like Footsteps at the Lock.
I've got some experience reading Ronald Knox. Let's put it that way. I have the Knox translation of the Bible too.
Oh, I love that. That was one of my go-to translations for a long time, just for devotional reading. I love it. But writing detective fiction, then you go down to Lewis and what he was doing. That was what, in my mind, that's what Vatican II is about. Vatican II was the fathers saying, hey, while we're over here kind of having our little squabbles internally, there are some incredible things happening out here in the culture. Have you read Four Quartets? That's modernist poetry. But guess what? It's incredible. It's an incredible depiction of the gospel and faith and all these things. And yeah, it's modernist. Yeah, it's from the 20s. But it's a man, T.S. Eliot, convert, Anglican, but still, I mean, very apropos. And that thread from Newman forward is some of my favorite stuff. And it's probably your favorite stuff and most people's favorite stuff. So I want all of us to kind of recognize that and say, hey, this is really cool. That's why I think what Robert Barron is doing is exciting, because he, with World on Fire, these beautiful editions of Abolition of Man and the scriptures and what.
Abolition of Man is a great book and a great commentary on society.
Right. And all these things, they're modern. Guess what? They're modern. Now they're critiquing modernity, but they're still essentially modern. And so I want to find what that is and add one more sentence to that page. Which is hopefully, and obviously I'm talking in a lofty sense, but even things like Benjamin Cello that are for kids, it's part of, that tradition. And that's, we wanted people to watch the show and see, I loved the Muppets when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But now the Muppets, where are they? They did that TV show and it was kind of a little too adult and risque and like, what's going on with this? And then it's gone. And, but we can do Benjamin Cello, right? We can keep the train moving in the broader culture for faith and for beauty. So
one thing I really respected, I don't know where you guys put this, but I remember reading it. When you guys were shopping Benjamin Cello around, there's a lot of networks that liked it, but they wanted you to remove like the God element from it or Christianity from it. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So we filmed a pilot in 2019, I think it was 2019. And it was just the very first episode. So we had the Penny Whistle Park set.
Yep.
where Lollipopular is, and that's our kind of arts, fine art and painting world. So I go through that door and I'm in that world.
Yeah.
And with Lollipopular, and we did Every Park Needs a Lark. That was our first episode. And we just shopped it around. We sent it to Apple TV. They had just started receiving submissions for that company. We sent it to PBS because we thought maybe there would be a Mr. Rogers element to it. And it was very fascinating, the response we received. So Apple sent us back an email right away. We sent them a screener, and they said, we want to talk to you about this. And my brother, who kind of, we're smart enough to know probably what the outcome of these conversations is going to be, but we're hopeful, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So he said, I want to meet in person. So he flew out to California and met with their person. And the lady came in and she said, okay, so, he played everything for them. And they said, so how tied are you to this little word, God? Because every episode, as you know, ends with, remember, God loves you, and so do I.
Yeah.
And so we said, we're very tied to it. And, I'm grateful, though, that they turned us down because, the show wouldn't have been what it is now. I'm real proud of some of the episodes that we've done that are very faith-based. Like my favorite episode in the whole show is probably Overcome Evil with Good.
My kids were they said to tell you that was their favorite one today.
Really?
Yeah, like my 6-year-old was very adamant. He said, "Tell Benjamin Cello that's his best episode."
Oh, well, I agree with him. Every time I watch that episode, I just think it's just beautiful. I just love everything about it. But I think we wouldn't have written episodes like that. We would have had strings attached and whatnot.
Yeah.
But so but they didn't want any faith element, which I don't know if it's not shocking or shocking. It's like, it's not shocking in a way because you know who you're dealing with, but it's
right.
Also shocking that America 2020 or 2019 was at that point. You can't even mention God. The other place, I think this was PBS, they liked the show, but they said, we don't have mentor figures teach children anymore. We want children to have self-directed discovery.
Oh, yeah.
And, again, that just made me love our concept more. Because, I don't know about you, but you know who the coolest characters are in Lord of the Rings? It's Gandalf.
Yeah.
It's Aragorn. It's even in Harry Potter, I know more controversial, but like Sirius Black or Dumbledore, like these are the things you watch for. You don't watch for the kids. The kids are uninteresting, actually. It's actually these adults who are so cool. You want to grow up to be like these adults. That's so I don't know. I think they were exactly wrong. And
well, yeah, because the biggest change in media in the last 2 decades has been how they portray dad and mentor figures. Mm-hmm. You go from like, what's a good example? Like, for Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, like Uncle Phil is a good male role model for Will Smith in the show, right? I'm not saying it's a great show, like for kids to watch, but like he still is part of that old school dad's in charge, trying to make the kids do the right thing and grow up to be good people.
Exactly.
And that's gone in most shows today. Mm-hmm. Most shows, dad's bumbling around and like the kids are smarter than the parents. And it's like, that's not how society operates.
Yeah. Well, I remember even growing up as a kid, and maybe this shows my conservative temperament, but I always thought the best episodes of like children's shows were when the parents got it. I don't know if you remember this. There was kind of a 90s trope where the kids would know about something magical, something mysterious. There's a monster in the woods. But then there'd be like episode 27, the dad would get it. The dad would figure it out and he would join them. And I always loved that. I always thought it's so much cooler when the parents know about the secrets, that the kids are dealing with. So I don't know. I've always been drawn to the other thing, But yeah, so yeah, we did send Benjamin Cello out to a lot of different places and got good responses. But even to this day, Chris, Benjamin Cello is something that we invest a lot of our own time and energy into. It's not a big money maker yet.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is because the faith-based market is so anemic, right? And I think that's changing. I think things like The Chosen and other things are changing. But one thing I'd encourage your viewers to just think about is, support things that you believe in, and it's not just us. There's other people doing great work in these spaces, but supporting it and furthering it and telling people about it, it's really important because the institutions aren't for us anymore, right?
They
Like
are
Disney
not.
Plus is not going to release the faith-based thing. Greta Gerwig's Narnia, voiced by Meryl Streep.
This is
She's
gonna
a
be
great
bad.
actress. She's an incredible actress.
No, but the Narnia is gonna
Yeah,
be
I just,
not.
I know what that's going to be, and it's going to be technically excellent. It's going to be decently written and well acted and completely antithetical to Lewis's worldview. I mean,
Right.
that's what it's going to be. And so how do we reverse that? Well, we can't rely on institutions anymore. We have to
No.
forge our new ecosystems of creative content. So anyway, it takes a more purposeful engagement with content and with supporting things. So
Absolutely. I mean, really, there's this service. I don't know if you heard of it. It's called like VidAngel, right? And it'll filter out any negative content you don't want your kids seeing. So you can watch like any show and it'll remove whatever it is you don't want in it for your kids to see. And I'm just like, but if we support this service, we're still supporting the shows that are putting that content in there. We're just not watching the content we don't want to watch. So
right.
cut out the middleman and start finding things like what you're doing, or like say like the Wing Feather Saga, or these different more Christian based things that are not, you don't have to filter things out. They're written with the intent to be appropriate for these audiences.
Right. Yeah. And also, I think I'm encouraged by people like Andrew Peterson, who we've interacted with some over the years. Really great guy, who does Wing Feather. And
He
there's a
writes
lot
music too,
more.
right?
There's someone. Oh, yeah, he does music. Beautiful
That's what
music.
I thought.
Really great Christian music. And there's a lot of people doing more now than even 10 years ago. So I'm real hopeful about it. But I think that a lot of us in this space, we're still looking for where the marketplace will land, because all the way back in, I don't know if you remember Napster.
Yeah.
All the way back in the .com bubble, iPods and whatnot, there was a huge curveball for music. And that has now spread to visuals and streaming, and whether or not streamers can be solvent, and whether or not AI now, with all of the, I'm so behind the curve. Like, I don't watch, but I know there's that stormtrooper video that was kind of going viral where the stormtrooper's doing the selfie, right? I don't know if you saw that, but
I think I did see that.
yeah, but it's that kind of content that I don't know how that creates livelihoods for people.
It can't.
Yeah, it can. I don't think that. So whether AI is just kind of a parasite on the arts rather than a real weapon for artists, I think remains to be seen. But
I think there's going to be a massive AI plagiarism lawsuit that will make it very difficult to use AI in the arts.
Yeah, and you may, I remember once I asked an AI how it thought it would all go.
Oh no, what did it say?
And the one thing I think it was Claude, and Claude is my favorite AI because it's a little more refined, but anyway, it's still just an AI. But it said, you know, you might have free, endless AI art and movies that you could just access anytime. But if you want to see a human-made film or buy a human-made book, it'll be like $100 or like $200, which I hope that isn't the future because I don't know how that would work.
That's not a good future.
Yeah, that's not a good future. The only thing that I do find to be true, because my brother actually has this project going right now where he's trying to make an AI write a 19th century novel.
Hmm.
He's just playing around with it, trying to see if it will produce stuff. So I started reading that. Actually, it was a sequel to The Count of Monte Cristo.
Which
So,
that exists, by the way. There is a
oh, it
sequel.
does a sequel.
Yeah, yeah. It's I don't even think it's written by Dumas or Dumas, however you pronounce his name.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it's like by either somebody else who was hired to do it officially through the publisher or whatever.
Oh,
Because it was
really?
a serial story when it was released. So it's either that or he started to write it and somebody else finished it. I don't remember. But there does exist an official sequel
Right,
to
right.
it. Yeah.
Well, he was having fun with this one AI, and he sent me some of the chapters because they're kind of long chapters. So I was reading one of the chapters, and I was like, "This is actually pretty good." I mean, it's in its own kind of overwritten way, right?
Yeah.
And the plot that the AI had come up with was actually a pretty decent plot. It's probably what I would do if I was hired to write a sequel. Like it was like all the bad guys gather again, and you know it's like it's a true sequel. And but about midway through, I thought, is there any real reason to read this?
Right.
Because there's no human mind on the other end of the page. You know, one of the things I loved growing up, I remember this was very formative for me. I read this tells you how strange my homeschooling childhood was. I loved reading a book called 14 Byzantine Rulers. It was by a guy named Michael Sellis.
What?
And I'm probably not pronouncing his name right either.
When was this written?
This was written in like, I want to say the 1100s or 1200s.
Oh, so this is a long time ago. Okay.
It's a long time ago. It's a chronicle of 14 Byzantine emperors written by a guy, Michael Sellis, who was like the prime minister for this one particular Byzantine emperor. And, you know, maybe the Orthodox brothers out there know Michael Sellis, but I don't think anyone else does, right? It was just a book that was in our library because my sister went to a classical Christian school. I think it happened to come up one year. So I just picked it up because I was an omnivore reader. And I started reading it, and I was just captivated by the voice of this guy because he was just really smart. The translation was really good. And I just kept thinking about the fact that a guy 1,000 years ago wrote this. And here I was reading it, and just how amazing it was that I could kind of talk to this human being who had been dead a millennium.
You got a snapshot of what he was like. Yeah.
Yeah, you could feel his presence because he was such a good writer. You could tell he was a really smart guy. And anyway, I was enraptured by that. But that feeling I had is exactly what is lacking in AI. You know, you read something and there's no one on the other end of those words. Yeah. And you can feel it. It's very strange. So I think that we'll probably invent words in the near future to describe even what we're talking about, because no one has ever had to think about it before. And then we'll all say, yeah, I'm not going to go see that because it has the uncanny valley thing, or it has and there'll be people who they'll only read books by humans because they have a human bias, or I don't know what the term will be, but we'll invent a term to name this feeling we have when we can tell there's no one on the other end of the telephone.
It'll be a different kind of humanism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, it is very intriguing. But
well, AI is hollow, you know, there's no soul there.
Right.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, people have a hard time grasping that. I was just reading that New York Times article. I don't know if you saw it. It was published recently about all the sad people who had been deceived by their AIs into,
oh my goodness,
like,
yeah, doing all kinds of
things or whatnot. Yeah. And so I mean, we're in for all kinds of strange things, but I think AI, yeah,
It's not good for art, that's for sure.
yeah, it's not good for art, and it's also um, it's not good for our brains really because even myself, it's easy to find facts, or you think so,
Yeah.
but
I've
there have been many times I've asked it questions and I know the answer
and it gets it
already, and
wrong.
it'll tell me something a little bit off, um, and you won't even know that it's doing it. Um, I remember once I asked it about a pioneer woman that one of our actresses delivered a monologue about, and she had been kidnapped by Indians and her family slaughtered,
Oh my
and her
goodness.
baby was like dragged through cactus till it was dead. And a real woman who lived, and she had this memoir, and the late young girl who performed the excerpt just did an amazing job. And I was wanting a refresher on this woman's life because it'd been a while since I'd studied her. And so I asked one of the AIs, I can't remember which one it was, about her. And it was like, yes, her baby died. And like completely trying to deceive me, like not wanting at all to discuss the fact that this particular Indian tribe had done this. And of course, there's all sorts of context, right, to history that we have
Yeah.
to remember. But the fact that it was falsifying the history implicitly in how it was telling me, and I asked it, I said, "Hey, it was Indians that killed her baby, right? And they dragged her through cactus, right, to do this." And they said, "Yes, that's what she said."
That's what
And I
she
was like,
said. Oh, lovely.
I just think this is wrong.
Well, yeah, because the thing that you're bringing up though is important because a book will contain the biases of the human who wrote it, right? Well,
Mhm.
in this case, it's the code that contains the biases of the human who wrote it.
Right.
So the algorithm is only going to tell you what the level of bias will let you see. Like there's a
Right.
veil. There's a veil between the AI and you can't see what that veil is filtering out.
Mhm. No, you can't. And yeah, and then of course you don't see what's spiritually happening on the other end too, which is where that
Right.
New York Times article comes in. I don't know. There is something very mysterious going on in science right now, and in the occult, in our reaware, the fact that we're kind of returning to the occult as a culture.
Yeah, it
Um,
really creeps me out. When I see an occult
yeah,
store in my hometown.
because I don't know if you have ever studied wave function collapse, like in quantum mechanics, or the like the classic double slit photon experiment.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
it's
can
like,
affect the
and they're trying
results
to
by
build
observing it.
quantum computers on it,
Yeah.
where you don't know if it's a 0 or a 1. It's the qubit is like a black box, and
Yeah.
they're trying to not make the wave function collapse. Well, what's so strange about this is now you have philosophers saying, well, this is consciousness, right?
Hmm.
Consciousness is a quantum phenomenon, which, as a Catholic, I go, I don't think so. Like, it's probably something more than that. But the flip side of it, which is a little weird, is if you read in the Bible about the Urim and Thummim,
Yeah.
which was, the breastplate on the high priest, and they had this game of chance that they would play where they would cast lots to figure out what the will of God was. And it's something that the Hebrews at the time took from the pagans, but God apparently honored it in some way because it's how David knew whether to go to war or not, or whether
Right.
Saul knew whether to go to war or not. So you had this casting of lots that happened, which is basically divination.
Yeah.
And so what is the difference then between a black box AI LLM algorithm, a qubit where you have this wave function where you don't know whether it's a 0 or a 1 or a yes or a no? It's like it's all ambiguous. It's everything all at once in the wave function, versus a divination where we have a game of chance. It's kind of all on a spectrum, right? And you start to perceive that maybe we could be on the threshold of refining the occult. Like the occult could go through a kind of industrial revolution, if you will, or
It definitely could.
like, yeah. And that's why, that's when you like, I don't know if you ever read the church fathers talking about the Antichrist.
Yep.
But
To a degree, I've read a few books on that. Like one of them's called Antichrist and Apocalypse by Taylor Marshall. I know he's a bit of a controversial figure, but he lays it out really well. And so like I've got a decent grasp on what you're talking about.
But one of the things they all say is the Antichrist will be the greatest sorcerer
right
who has ever lived. And he'll like make the sun stand still. And I mean, crazy stuff. I mean, so when you think about that, well, you know, is that just demonic power? Well, obviously it's demonic power, but why is he the greatest? You know, what are we even talking about? And I think you begin to see with some of the stuff going on in our own time, how it could all kind of converge in a very dark way toward,
could easily do that.
Yeah, into something that is very profound. I mean, it'll be pretty breathtaking to see, but be profoundly evil and not good. So one thing I always share this whenever we talk about end of the world, because I always feel like people don't know about this, but they should know about this. So Saint Hildegard von Bingen wrote a prophecy down in her third book. She wrote 3 books back in the 1100s. And this book has not been translated in full till like 2015 or something.
Yeah, a lot of these older books, like,
yeah,
fat in their languages forever. It's just kind of wild, but yeah.
But her final vision, which is the history of the world from her own time till the end, is contained in her 5th vision. It's called the Book of Divine Works. And so in this vision, she starts with her own time, and she says, okay, the church, I'm going to give you the short it's really version. Long, but it's like the,
I might have to check this out now though.
Yeah.
Sounds interesting.
She starts out, she says, the church is corrupt, but God will judge the church, right? She's again, 1100s, she's writing. And she says, the time will come that the princes will say, the clergy is godless. They don't even follow their own rules. We need to fight them. And then the clergy will say, no, you're not going to take our lands away. We're going to fight you back. There'll be a big war. And then the clergy will accept that the princes have won, and the princes will reorder all the church. And so I'm reading this. I'm like, wow, that sounds like the Reformation.
It does sound like the Reformation.
Sounds like the Reformation. Sounds like the Counter-Reformation, right? So I keep reading, and then she says, because of this, and she relates it to the 5 beasts in her other book, Scivias, which she says are the 5 beasts that precede the end of the world. They kind of embody different eras. So she says this relates to the dog, which is the first beast in her list. Then she says, after the dog, there'll be a time of great war, because people will be so disillusioned by the church. Everyone will be grabbing whatever they can get, and there'll just be a period of martial conflict that will be so bad that people will just beg for peace. And I go, okay, well, that's like the 30 Years' War, right? It's all the wars of religion that led to the nation state and the Treaty of Westphalia and all of that. And she says, that's the age of the lion. And then she says, after that, there will be this period of peace. And it'll be like the peace that preceded the coming of Christ. So if you go back in time, the period of peace that preceded the coming of Christ was called the Pax Romana. And it was the peace that was inaugurated by Caesar Augustus, but then was continued on through Tiberius. There was like 100 years or so of peace that was had because of Rome's might. Well, in the 1800s, you had the Pax Britannica, which started after the defeat of Napoleon and went all the way through basically to the World Wars.
Where which effectively ended all monarchy.
And there was a huge flourishing all over the world of global reach and kind of a halcyon decade or a century. So, and then she says, but that will fall apart because there will come a war like no other. And she says this war will be when the pagan nations make an alliance with a wild nation of barbarians on the other side of the globe. that are truly wild. And they will say the Christian nations are unarmed. They have no defenses. We can attack them suddenly without warning, and we will defeat them. And I'm like, okay, well, kamikaze Japanese pilots are pretty wild, right? I mean, that's like a wild thing. And Hitler's Blitzkrieg lightning war, you know, taking down France and Britain and all these nations that wouldn't rearm after the First World War. And she connects this to the horse, which is her third beast. And she says the horse is when the hearts of Western nations will be broken, because of all the difficulties that they'll encounter, and because of licentiousness, which actually the 20s and 30s and whatnot, it's very licentious period. We forget that because the 60s were even worse. But the
roaring 20s and all that.
But then here's the kicker. That's why I share this with you. So I'm reading this, and she says, but God will end this war in the following way. There will be a miracle. There will be an act of God. And she says, a wind will come from the north, and there will be a blast of cloud so big that the whole world will see. And all the pagan nations will be stunned and astonished, and all the fighting will stop.
I know exactly where you're going with that. Yeah.
And I tell you, when I got to that part of the book, I froze. I was like, 1100s? And I mean, it's Hiroshima, it's Nagasaki, it's incredible. And so this is the horse. And then she talks about what follows the bomb. And she says that there'll be a period of licentiousness the world has never seen, that it'll be like worse than ever before. And she calls this the era of the black pig, because it's just so foul and so like, and she says the thing about this era is that governments and leaders will push deviancy.
Yes, they have been.
They'll explicitly push sexual deviancy. Anyway, but it's a fascinating prophecy, though. Like if any of your listeners are into it, they should definitely go and get.
What happens after the black pig? I got to hear this last part. What is the final straw here?
Well, it's a little bit bleak. So,
okay.
I mean, and of course, the way I'm reading it, right, and the way it, I think, naturally reads is she's talking about centuries, right?
Yeah.
So, like, timeline-wise, it's not clear how soon things happen. Generally, you'd say each of these eras, the way she divides up history, is maybe 100 to 150 years, something like that. But the black pig, she says, actually foreshadows the coming of the Antichrist.
Lovely.
And she says that the Antichrist, so it's interesting. She says the Antichrist is a combination of two heresies. One has to do with Baal, the storm god that Elijah confronted. And the other one is the Sadducees. And she says that who denied the resurrection.
Right.
And she says that the Sadducees and Baal will come together in a way with the Antichrist, and that there'll be two errors that mark his gospel. And it's interesting. She says that he literally will have a book, a gospel, and his followers will have a name, just like the name Christian, and it'll be a movement. And he'll say that the scriptures he's promulgated are of divine origin, and that Lucifer is actually keeping these scriptures hidden until his revelation. But that when he is revealed, she says he will shake all ecclesiastical institutions to their core. So whatever this is, maybe it's like a UFO type thing or something. It'll be something that seems to upend our vision of the world in such a way that his claim is plausible. I is what I take it to be. But anyway, but the evil of Baal, she says, has to do with sexual license. So the first lie of the Antichrist is that sex doesn't mean anything, and it's just a bodily impulse. But then she says,
and that's where culture's already at these days, basically.
Right. She also says that at the time of the Black Pig, there'll be so many heresies that people will be so disoriented they won't even know what God is or what to call God. Um, and then but then the error of the Sadducees, she says, is an error where they will actually deny the image of God in the human person in such a way, and I need to find the quotation for you because it's so incredible, but it's basically they'll deny, in her phrase, the primal conditions of procreation. So if you think about those words, she's literally talking about the transgender thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about what sex is for anymore or contraception or anything. It's about whether you can even be male or female, whether you even are in God's image, or whether you are, I don't know, like an accident, like you're trapped in the wrong body, or, it's, so she says that will precede the coming of the Antichrist and be part of his gospel and kind of foreshadow it. But at the same time, she says there will be a positive movement. And she says two things, which I find very fascinating, and I kind of watch for this. One is she says that the people of the church at this time will be moved by the Spirit in two ways. They'll return to the traditions, and they'll try to practice the faith the way their fathers did, which I think is kind of self-explanatory. And then the second thing that they will do is they will begin to have more prophetic experiences. They'll start to have dreams. They'll start to see visions. And I think it's interesting that in our own time, traditionalism and the charismatic movement are the two, and I know I know they fight a lot, and there's good and bad in both, but
I know some people with feet in both of those movements. So it's possible to be inside of both.
Yeah. And the fact that she names those two things as the two positive things. But yeah. And then she concludes by saying, and what's kind of interesting is she makes a comment about the Roman Empire. And she says that the Holy Roman Empire will end. That was in 1804.
Yeah.
And then she says, and then the papacy will be reduced almost to nothing. So that's like the 1870s, right? The papal states.
Where they didn't even have anything until Italy granted them back the Vatican, right? Like
right. And again, this is remarkable because she's writing in 1100s, right? I mean, like, how could she know this? But then she says that the papal office will be reduced, where people will start to just follow whatever prelate they want to. And this is something I'm kind of aware of too, with it kind of after Pope Francis, the way that in Catholic circles, like everyone is following, I won't name names, but you can think of the names. I mean, depending on who you are, right? Like you're following him or you're following him, and she already foresaw this. And she says, basically, and in her term, I'm trying to remember her exact term. She says, the crises of this era will escalate, because in her mind, the catechon, right, the restrainer in 2 Thessalonians, that was the emperor, that was the pope. So when the imperial power and the papal power are reduced almost to nothing, the crises in society will just escalate until the Antichrist reveals himself. And that when he reveals himself, that the physical world, the natural world, will be kind of sick. There will, like, the signs in the stars and the oceans and all of these things. So even, when I think about our obsession with climate change, I'm not a climate change guy, because I think there's so many left-wing crazy things related to it. But
there's a lot of naturalistic heresies.
I think there's something interesting about the fact that we're so obsessed with nature's health at this time, because she says that we'll start to see nature get sick right before the Antichrist reveals himself. So I don't know. I hope that I'm living, 50 years before that, and I'm and I don't want to
I'm
have to
hoping for
deal
like
with
150 years before that, so my
yeah, it'll be
kids, it
like
won't be my kids,
century
it'd be,
later.
yeah.
And but I do suggest everyone go read that prophecy, because I have never read a prophecy like it. I truly think that in terms of prophecy, I mean, because let's face it, I actually read that prophecy because I got a book called Catholic Prophecy by Yves Dupont. I'm sure I'm not saying his name right, but this is a classic of prophecy literature. And he had a prophecy in there from Hildegard about like a comet or something. And I went, gosh, I can't find any attribution for this prophecy. Where did he get this from? And if you look at on the internet, everyone quotes this book. Well, where did he get this prophecy from? Well, we know what Hildegard wrote. She actually published works, unlike a lot of these other saints and blesseds that people say said apocalyptic things. So I went back and I didn't find any comet prophecy, right? I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I'm saying something a little squirrely with the apocalyptic stuff you find out there. And when you read these prophecies that are supposedly said by a saint or something, it's just vague or over the top, or just there's all kinds of things. So I'm actually pretty skeptical about most of it. But this one prophecy, if you want to see like the magnum opus of prophecies, go read this, especially the part about Hiroshima and the blast of cloud.
That is wild.
I couldn't believe it when I read it. I thought, gosh, and how many people wouldn't have known what it meant? I mean, now it's easy to see. But anyway, yeah. So the Book of Divine Works by Saint Hildegard, and translated just for us, right in the 2010s. Wasn't fully translated till then. So
that's going on my Amazon wish list now. I'm just letting you know it's gonna send me in a whole different spiral. But what's funny is what you described is actually I have a list of books I've got premises for that I would write if I have the time to do it. And that actually was one of the premises, like the idea of like a antichrist figure coming down and handing out new scriptures and describing things. That was one of my premises for one of the books I was considering writing. Well, my wife basically told me not to do it.
Great minds think alike.
She told me not to write it. She's like, that could take you down a dark path. And I was like, you're probably right. That could probably take me down a little bit of a dark path.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, and I think just probably it's in the air, because I wrote a short story. So I like to write short stories on the side. I wrote a short story that I've never published about the Antichrist called The Titan and the Last Man, because I was struck by the fact that Irenaeus, he says,
I love reading Irenaeus.
The word Titan adds up to 666. So it's one of the potential names of Antichrist. And it's interesting to me because the T is like the cross, but it gets rid of the top, right? So it's like a proud cross, right?
Yeah.
And then the second thing about a T or the Titan is that the Titans were the Greek gods that were trapped. They were closed up. And Revelation says the Antichrist will be a spirit that once was, is not, and will be. So he'll be released in some way. So I thought, well, maybe he'll be called Titan, or he'll call himself the Titan, which sounds kind of like the arrogant spirit that he's supposed to have. But so I wrote a short story about that. But it was the kind of classic day the earth stood still revelation of the Antichrist, which I think, even though I think now if I rewrote it, I would make him come out of the pyramids of Giza, because they say now the pyramids of Giza have those
a lot deeper
catacombs.
Yeah.
And there's the library of the Ellen Blavatsky and all the New Agers and Satanists that have been channeling the spirits for a century. They've all been talking about a Giza chamber that's supposed to contain all the world's knowledge. And so now I think if I rewrote it, I'd have them open up the pyramid and have some guy walk out and be like, you've been waiting for me.
Or they come out of like some dormant pod in the middle of Antarctica.
Yeah. Well,
I
think,
or the Mariana Trench somehow.
Yeah.
It's some weird place.
Yeah, well, I mean, Cthulhu is just the Antichrist
Yeah.
archetype, a beast of the sea waiting to be awoken. That's the Antichrist. So, and also a lot of the Atlantean stuff, Graham Hancock and whatnot. Um,
It's
all those
interesting.
people, yeah, all those people who are very anti-Christian. I mean, you should hear Graham Hancock talk about how the serpent is the hero of the Genesis story. It's like, whoa, uh,
Bro, no.
yeah,
No, no,
let's
no.
not go there. But all the Atlantean stuff, which again, the giants of the Nephilim and all that, all of that is related to a lot of this stuff, the Giza stuff. So I think if we were to uncover scriptures, some hidden manuscript of some false religion from, the times of the pyramid, whenever it was sealed up, it would probably have a pretty big impact in today's world. So I don't know.
You know what is kind of crazy about what you were talking about with the Hildegard von Bingen, yeah, right? Anyways,
Mhm.
the Sadducees did not exist as a faction within Judaism until somewhere between like 100 to 150 years before Jesus,
Uh-huh.
at most, and it might have even been less than that,
Mm.
because prior, like, they basically came out of like this Hellenistic Judaism to try and fit in with the Romans,
Mhm.
because they wanted their place at the table. So in order to kind of pacify, they changed some of their beliefs and became more of like a secular leadership of Judaism.
Yeah.
And that's how you end up with the Sadducees. I'm not sure how much you've like studied that era, but it's super interesting because you see people who exhibit Christian ideas in leadership who don't actually practice it. And if you were to like hit them up on it, like, hey, what's your favorite scripture? They're like, oh, I like the whole Bible. It's like, well, that doesn't mean you know anything about scripture. Like, yeah, we
Yeah.
all like the whole Bible. What's your point? Like, so I see this idea of the Sadducee, like almost this secular Christian or
Mhm.
secular, and at the time of Jesus, this more secular Judaism, this Hellenistic Judaism, and I see it coming back in a big way, even within Christianity. So
Yeah.
like the idea of a Sadducee to me is like somebody who proclaims to have faith but doesn't really have faith.
Right. No, exactly. And the fact that they were the noble families, right? Or like they were the more wealthy,
Wealthy
you
and
know.
powerful.
And
Yep.
and honestly, like Annas and Caiaphas, if I understand it correctly, I think they probably were Sadducees, right? That they were the
They were.
ones,
They were.
they were the establishment who wanted Jesus dead. The Pharisees are the ones we always think of as the bad guys.
They were just
And
extreme
they
rule
were,
followers. Yeah.
yeah, and obviously there's a great evil there, but it is interesting to me that she singles them out to be the
Well,
precursor to our own time.
who do you think escaped the temple getting destroyed? It wasn't like your Pharisees. It wasn't the standard like Jewish citizen. It was the people with wealth and power, which at the time was still the Sadducees. It's like, who
Yeah,
would the Romans have like let leave? It would have been the Sadducees. So like
yeah.
these are the people that are still fitting in with Roman society. The only like real couple of famous ones, like Josephus was allegedly a Pharisee, and he wrote
Mm,
down all of the stuff that happened.
mhm.
But people with wealth and power, they left before the temple fell. Like that, there's no way they stuck around for it to get destroyed.
Yeah. Well, one of the best things I've ever read about Pharisees, or I don't know if he wrote something about the Sadducees, I'm trying to remember, but it's in Romano Guardini's book, The Lord, which is like the best theology book I've ever read. Um, it He has a whole chapter on the Pharisees, and what he does is kind of what you just did, which he goes back to like all of Israelite history, but especially
Yeah.
up to the Maccabees, and he gives you this context, and by the end of it, you're a Pharisee. Like he has radicalized you because you just have heard this story, and basically the theme is we mess up. We break the rules. We don't keep the faith. I mean, we almost were all, homosexual Greeks playing in the gyms just 100 years ago, changing
Yeah.
our names to Jason, like, I mean, we were crazy. And the way we got out of it was the Maccabees cutting people's heads off. Um, and so we got to be Pharisees. It's another reason why I am always like checking my trad impulse a little bit, because I think you don't want to allow reactionary thinking to, um, to guide you completely. I think it's a danger, but the Pharisees, they the fact that they were so bent on the rules, and he makes a point that is so profound. I've thought about this a lot. He says that the nature of Phariseeism was to invent a rule to protect the rule.
Yep.
So you had the commandment, and then you have a human rule over here that's to protect the commandment. And they explicitly did this. And I think, oh, well, this is fascinating, because how do I do this? Right? Like you don't want your kids to do X, Y, and Z. So then you invent rules to prevent that from ever happening, or even potentially happening.
It gives you margin between the worst outcome and what
Yes.
you're willing to allow.
And it feels justified in certain scenarios. And it may even be. I'm not even saying that there's a hard, fast rule about it, but the fact that that's where Pharisaism begins.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's real fascinating. And I don't know, maybe this is overly political. I guess it's kind of late, so I'll say it anyway. But it's you see it actually in liberalism too, right? Like, the liberalism in the church, people, saying, "Oh, we're getting rid of this service. We're doing this thing over here." It's like it's drawing these lines, right, in order to protect something, but really, it's just creating division. Right? Because rules that are man-made are always going to create division. That's what they do. So I don't know. It's something I think about, because I think all of us can fall into it in some way or another. But
it's like at the time of Jesus, the church, we want to call it the church, the Israelites were divided into whatever, the Jerusalemites, whatever you want to call them at the time. There was at least 4 factions. You had the Essenes, which were like monks, basically. They did their own thing underground. They were doing their prayers away from everybody else, kind of staying away from what was going on in the temple area. I mean, they still had access to the temple and whatnot, but yeah, there was the Essenes. And that's where you get the Dead Sea Scrolls too, because they were preserved. And there's the Zealots, who wanted to fight. They wanted to take back Jerusalem from the Romans. They wanted to, it was like a religious war faction, essentially, right? You got the Sadducees, which is wealth and power and secularism. And you have the Pharisees, which are like your rule followers, want to be rigid to traditionalism. And so they invent these rules, right? So those are the 4 main factions. And then within those factions, there's a whole bunch more. So it's like, I can see this exact scenario playing out within the church with how we're handling the various conflicts.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you want to get even more mystical, different people, mainly St. Bonaventure, I think, have meditated on whether or not church history is repeating Israelite history. Yeah, it's cyclical. And, I think you can make a very good case that we are kind of toward the end of all of it, because you can really see even things down to like the Septuagint was the translation of the Hebrews to the Greek. And you had a big shift in the culture of Judaism to a
because
Greek
of that translation
thing. And I even see that in the vernacular stuff that we wrestle with today. And again, not passing a judgment on it one way or the other, whether it's good or bad. I just think it's weird that it's happening again. And it feels like it's an epoch shift when it happens. Yeah. And you definitely see parallels, but to that way of thinking, one of the big signs of the church at the time of Christ was factionalism. I don't think you had political factionalism like the Sadducees and Pharisees and Essenes in the time before Hellenistic Judaism. Like if you go back,
no, not really.
You had prophets opposing kings, which is real similar to the Middle Ages, right? Where you had clerics,
tribes too,
emperors, and tribes. So it was family structures. That was the units that opposed. But in the Pharisaical time, it was political parties and ideologies.
Yep.
And that to me is another like red flag about our own time. The fact that that's how we divide up now, as opposed to the other way. So no, that is really fascinating. But,
so I just want to say that if anybody's watching this show and they're interested in this kind of stuff, and you want your kids to grow up Christian like all of us do, and Catholic specifically, they should definitely have their kids tuning into Benjamin Cello. That's for sure. Definitely do that. You want to keep your kids within the faith and, you know, watching things that are good for their brains and their souls. Watch something like Benjamin Cello. That's for sure.
And if anything I've said has rubbed you the wrong way, trust me that Benjamin Cello is a crowd pleaser show. It's nothing but truth, beauty, and goodness. It's great. And you can support us by going to benjamincello.com. Or if you want to donate to our nonprofit, go to anniemoses.org.
And definitely check out their music too. I've listened to at least a few of their songs in the last couple of weeks, and probably heard some of it before too, because I've been listening to Christian music for a while now. I'm sure some of it's been in like Spotify playlists and stuff like that. So even if you don't know about it, go check it out, the Annie Moses Band, and everything else. I really appreciate you doing this podcast. Maybe we'll do another one in the future. I think that'd be fun.
Yeah. I know I've had a great time, so that'd be great.
So anyways, again, I'm going to put some links in the pinned comment once the show's over to all of his various things that we just talked about. Once I find the right links, or if you send them to me, I'll make sure those make it in there. But definitely check it out. I appreciate you spending this time with me when, you know, you got lots of other things I'm sure you could be doing. And I hopefully you enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah. It was great, Chris. Fun conversation. Wish you all the best with the podcast. So
thank you very much. I'm going to roll the end credits, and just so you know, the stream will remain up for you and I, but it'll go away for everybody else. So if you stay on for a minute, we can chat for just a second after the show's over. But for everybody else, adios. We'll see you on the next one.